The alien ship hung in the darkness like a wounded cathedral, its crystalline hull fracturing starlight into impossible geometries. Captain Vex Korath, of the Terran Deep Survey vessel Meridian's Edge, had seen many first contacts in her 30-year career, but never one that began with distress signals from a species that supposedly didn't exist. "They're bleeding atmosphere from 17 hull breaches," reported Navigation Officer Rin Vasquez, his cybernetic eye interface casting blue light across his weathered face. "Life support failing on multiple decks." Vex studied the alien vessel through the viewport, her enhanced vision picking out details that would escape baseline humans. The ship's design defied conventional physics surfaces that seemed to bend inward while extending outward, creating optical illusions that made her enhanced brain ache. These were the Neithver, the legendary ghost fleet that had haunted the Outer Rim for decades, appearing and vanishing like mirages. "They're hailing us," announced Communications Specialist Kay Torino, her forearms dancing across the quantum relay interface with practiced efficiency. The genetic modifications that allowed humans to interface directly with alien technology had been controversial, but in moments like this, they were invaluable. The transmission crackled with static and harmonics that suggested a completely alien vocal apparatus. When the universal translator kicked in, the voice that emerged was hauntingly melodic, like wind through crystal chimes. "Terran vessel, this is Navigator Prime, Ylthera of the Deep Current Ship, Whisper of Distant Suns. We invoke the ancient codes of void mercy. Our children are dying." Vex felt something twist in her chest. Children? Even among the most alien species, that word carried weight. She thought of her own daughter, safe in the orbital academies of Earth, and made her decision. "This is Captain Korath. We're coming alongside. Prepare for emergency docking." Her XO, Commander Jax Meridian, a 7th-generation spacer whose family had been modified for Zeroji operations, floated beside her chair with practiced ease. "Captain, first contact protocols require." "Protocols be damned," Vex interrupted. "Rin, bring us in." "Jax, prep the medical bay for xenobiological emergencies." "K, maintain open channels." As the Meridian's Edge maneuvered closer to the alien vessel, Vex could see movement through the transparent sections of the Neithver ship. The beings inside moved like liquid mercury given consciousness, their forms seeming to shift between solid and something approaching pure energy. It was beautiful and terrifying. Captain K's voice held a note of wonder. "They're transmitting mathematical proofs, peace offerings, but these are equations we've never seen. They're showing us how to fold space-time more efficiently, how to generate energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations." The alien ship shuddered, and another section of hull blew out into space, taking with it what looked like furniture made of solidified light. Or maybe beings. With the Neithver, it was impossible to tell. "Faster, Rin," Vex ordered. As the two ships touched human angular metal, meeting alien organic curves, Vex felt a strange sensation, as if the universe itself had shifted slightly. The Neithver had been hiding in the deep void for good reason. They were refugees from something that had consumed half their species, and now, as the docking clamps engaged, and the airlock sealed, humanity was about to inherit their ancient enemy. The last thing Vex heard before the rescue began was Navigator Prime Ylthara's whispered words. They promised to stay distant. But gravity always wins. The first Neithver to cross the threshold between ships moved like liquid starlight, poured into a vaguely humanoid mold. Ylthara stood 7 feet tall, their crystalline skin shifting between translucent and opaque, as emotions Vex couldn't begin to interpret played across their features. What struck her most was their eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, each one containing what looked like a miniature galaxy. "Your ship tastes of iron and fear," Ylthara said, their voice creating harmonics that seemed to resonate in Vex's bones, but also, hope. "This is unexpected." Dr. Naya Salas, the Meridian's Edge's chief medical officer, stepped forward with her usual calm professionalism. Her own modifications, enhanced sensory organs, and adaptive immune system had prepared her for contact with unknown pathogens. But nothing had prepared her for beings that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. "We need to establish medical compatibility before we can help your injured," Naya said, her scanner already working. "Can you tell me about your physiology?" Yulthara's form rippled what might have been laughter. "We are not entirely here, as you understand existence. Part of us remains in the deep current, the space between spaces. When we are wounded, we bleed into multiple dimensions simultaneously." Behind Yulthara, more Nithva flowed into the corridor. Some carried what were clearly their young smaller versions that glowed with soft bioluminescence, their forms even more fluid than the adults. One child clung to what might have been their parent, making sounds like crystal bells in a gentle breeze. Vex found herself inexplicably moved. Despite their alien nature, the protective postures, the way the adults shielded their young, it was universal. "How many need immediate medical attention?" she asked. 47 of our young swimmers," Yulthara replied, "and 12 deep thinkers, your equivalent of what you might call scientists or philosophers. They were hurt when the void predators found us." Commander Jax floated closer, his modified physiology allowing him to navigate the zero-G environment with fluid grace. "Void predators." Yulthara's 3 eyes dimmed noticeably. "The hunger without form. They consume not just matter and energy, but the connections between things. They eat relationships, memories, the bonds that hold communities together. We fled when they devoured our homeworld's emotional resonance, leaving only empty shells of our people behind." Dr. Solis was already working with her team to set up triage areas. "We can adapt our medical bay to accommodate your physiology, but I'll need to understand how your multidimensional nature affects healing." "We heal through connection," Yulthara explained. "The sharing of experience, of emotional resonance, your ... separateness ... It is foreign to us. We do not understand how beings can exist in such isolation from one another." Vex felt an unexpected pang. Humans pride themselves on individualism, but looking at the way the Nether moved together, their forms occasionally merging at the edges, sharing thoughts and sensations, she wondered what they might be missing. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. "Kay, patch me through to Fleet Command. They need to know what we're dealing with." As Kay worked to establish long-range communications, Yulthara approached Vex directly. Up close, their presence was overwhelming, not threatening, but impossibly complex, like looking at a being who existed in 17 dimensions, but could only show 3 at a time. "Captain Korath," they said, and somehow Vex's name sounded like music when Yulthara spoke it. "There is something you must understand. The void - predators ... They follow the deep current. They will find us here. And when they do, they will not distinguish between Nether and human. To them, all consciousness is equally ... delicious." The corridor suddenly felt colder. Behind them, the sounds of medical work continued, human voices mixing with the harmonic tones of the Nether as 2 species worked together to save lives. But Vex knew that this moment of cooperation might be the last peace they would know. "How long do we have?" she asked. Yulthara's form shimmered with what might have been uncertainty. "In your measurement of time, perhaps days, perhaps hours. The void predators move through spaces that exist outside causality. They arrive when they arrive, as if summoned by their words." The ship's sensors began detecting something impossible at the edge of scanner. Range areas where space itself seemed to be going missing. 3 days after first contact, the Meridian's edge had become something unprecedented, a hybrid vessel where human technology merged with Nether biotechnology in ways that should have been impossible. Dr. Solis watched in fascination as Crystalline growths spread along the medical bay walls, pulsing with soft light that somehow accelerated healing in both species. "It's remarkable," she murmured to herself, observing a young Neithver named Ketheri, whose injuries were healing through what could only be described as dimensional origami. The child's wounds folded inward until they simply ceased to exist in normal space-time. Commander Jax floated nearby, his zero-G modifications allowing him to assist the Neithver in ways baseline humans couldn't. His enhanced proprioception let him navigate their multi-dimensional spaces partially, making him invaluable as a liaison. "They're teaching us things we never imagined," he reported to Vex over the com. "Their engineer Villaneth just showed me how to make our hull plating exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The structural integrity increase is off the charts." But it was in the ship's new hybrid command center that the real breakthrough was happening. Kay Torino, with her four-armed interface capability, had managed to connect human quantum computers with Neithver thought networks. The result was a communication system that operated faster than light through the deep current itself. "Captain," Kay called out, her multiple hands dancing across controls that now looked more grown than built. "I'm getting readings from the outer rim. The void-predators ... They're not just moving toward us, they're rewriting space as they travel." On the hybrid view screen, part human technology, part Neithver living crystal, the image that appeared defied comprehension. It looked like reality was being eaten from the inside out, leaving wounds in the fabric of existence itself. Ylthera materialized beside Vex, their form more solid now, as if proximity to humans was teaching them new ways of existing. "Your species has something we had forgotten," they said quietly. "The ability to remain individual while still connecting. We had become so merged with one another that we forgot how to fight as separate beings, and we'd become so individual that we'd forgotten how to truly connect," Vex replied, realizing the truth as she spoke it. Over the past 3 days, working alongside the Neithver, her crew had experienced something none of them could have imagined, a form of communion that didn't sacrifice identity. The ship shuddered as something impossible passed nearby a void predator scout, testing the boundaries of their reality. "They're probing our defenses," announced Rin from his navigation station. His cybernetic eye now interfaced directly with Neithver's sensing organs. "I can see. Captain, I can see through the deep current. There are thousands of them." The Neithver engineer flowed into the command center. Their form was more mechanical than the others, crystalline components integrated with what looked like living circuitry. "The void predators consume connection itself," they said, "but your species and ours together, we create a new form of connection they have never encountered." "What do you mean?" Vex asked. "Separately, we are prey," Ylthara explained. "My people. To connected we become one target, easily consumed. Your people, to separate you, become isolated targets, picked off one by one, but together we create something new," Vex breathed. Understanding. Dr. Solas's voice came over the com from the medical bay. "Captain, you need to see this. The hybrid healing chambers we've created, they're not just healing physical wounds, they're generating a new form of quantum entanglement between our species." As if to demonstrate her point, Vex suddenly felt a sensation like being connected to something vast and wonderful, but without losing herself in the process. She could sense Ylthera's thoughts, their fear and hope intermingled, but she was still completely, recognizably herself. "The void predators consume relationships," Jax said, his voice filled with wonder as he too felt the connection spreading through the ship. "But they've never encountered a relationship that makes both participants stronger rather than subsuming them." The ship's sensors screamed a warning as reality began to bend around them. The void predators had found them, and they were emerging from the deep current in force. But for the first time in weeks, Vex smiled. "All hands to battle stations," she announced. both human and Neithver. We're about to show these predators what happens when prey becomes predator. The hybrid vessel powered up systems that had never existed before. Weapons that fired concentrated connection itself, shields made of pure relationship. The greatest enemies of consciousness were about to learn what consciousness could do when it refused to be consumed. The void predators materialized around them, like wounds in reality itself. Dark absences that hurt to look at directly. Spaces where existence simply stopped. They moved without moving, approaching through dimensions that had no names. Their very presence causing sections of normal space-time to simply cease. In the hybrid command center, Vex felt the strange new connection with her crew and the Neithver intensify. It was unlike anything in human experience. Sure, remained completely herself. But she could feel Yulthara's ancient wisdom, Jax's zero-G intuition, Kay's multi-threaded consciousness, and dozens of others. Not a hive mind, but something new. Entirely. They're trying to isolate us, reported Rin, his enhanced vision tracking movement patterns that existed across 17 dimensions. Standard void predator strategy. They cut connections between individuals, then consume the lonely consciousness that remains. Then we give them something they can't cut, Vex said, her voice carrying new harmonics as the human-Neithver connection strengthened. Villainith, are the hybrid weapons online? The crystalline engineer's response came not just as words, but as a wave of mechanical satisfaction. The connection beam generators are ready, Captain. We are about to fire pure relationship at beings who consume relationships. The paradox should be interesting. The first void predator reached their perimeter, and Vex got her first clear look at the enemy that had driven the Neithver to near extinction. It was absence given form, not dark, but simply not there, a creature-shaped hole in existence that moved with hungry purpose. Where it passed, the stars themselves seemed to forget they had ever known each other. Fire, Vex commanded. The hybrid weapons discharged, and reality twisted. Instead of energy or matter, they fired the connections themselves, the bonds between crew members, the relationships forged between species, the love parents felt for children, and the loyalty friends shared with friends. It should have been impossible to weaponize such things. The void predator, struck by the connection beam, stopped moving, its absence form beginning to ripple. For creatures that fed on severing bonds, being struck by pure, concentrated relationship was like being poisoned. It's working, Kay announced, her forearms coordinating defense systems that operated on principles human science had never imagined. But there are hundreds of them. Through the connection network, Vex felt something she had never experienced, the combined will of two species facing extinction. Human determination merged with Neithver flowing adaptability, creating a hybrid consciousness that was somehow greater than the sum of its parts. All ships, this is Captain Korith. She broadcast on frequencies that reached through both normal space and the deep current. She could feel her words carrying across light years, reaching the scattered Neithver refugee fleets and the human colonies on the rim. We are demonstrating something new. Connection without consumption. Unity without uniformity. If you can hear this, add your strength to ours. One by one, across the galaxy, consciousness touched consciousness. Human ships began modifying their technology using Neithver principles shared through the deep current. Neithver fleets integrated human concepts of individuality within unity, and the connection network grew. Dr. Solas's voice crackled over the come from her medical bay, which had become something like a temple to the new relationship between species. Captain, the quantum entanglement is spreading beyond our ship. I'm reading connection formations in 17 star systems, but the void predators were adapting too. The larger ones began arriving, ancient beings that had consumed entire galactic sectors. Their absence formed so vast, they existed across multiple solar systems simultaneously. These were the deep hungers, creatures that had learned to feed on the connections between planets, between species, between ideas themselves. Yulthara, Vex said, feeling the Navigator Prime's consciousness merge more fully with her own. Show me the deep current, all of it. Reality exploded outward around them. Suddenly Vex could perceive the galaxy as the nether did not just as matter and energy, but as a vast web of connections. She could see the bonds between stars, the relationships that held matter together, the deep currents of causality that connected every particle to every other particle across space and time. And she could see the wounds the void predators had left, empty spaces where connections had been severed, dead zones where causality itself had been consumed. They're not just predators, she breathed, understanding at last. They're antibodies. Something in the universe is trying to prevent connection, to keep consciousness isolated and weak. But we are the cure. Ylthera's voice harmonized with her own thoughts. We are proof that connection strengthens rather than weakens, that consciousness shared becomes consciousness multiplied. Around them, the battle reached its crescendo as the largest void predator began to emerge, something so vast it existed, partially outside the galaxy itself. A hunger so deep it had been feeding on the connections between dimensions. But the hybrid network was ready. Across 17 star systems, human and Nithra consciousness merged into something unprecedented, a galactic mind that preserved individuality while creating unbreakable bonds. For the first time in eons, the void predators encountered something they could not consume, a relationship that made both participants stronger, a connection that could not be severed, because it created more of itself with every attempt to break it. The war for the future of consciousness had begun. The galaxy hunger materialized like a wound in the fabric of existence, itself and absence, so vast it stretched across multiple parsecs. A void predator so ancient it remembered the first moments when consciousness dared to connect with itself. Its presence caused entire star systems to forget they had ever existed in proximity to one another. But the hybrid network was ready. All connections, full resonance. Vex commanded, her consciousness now distributed across 17 star systems, while remaining completely, recognizably herself. Through the deep current, she could feel millions of minds, human and Nithra, linked in a web of relationship that grew stronger with every new addition. In the modified medical bay, Dr. Solace was no longer just treating injuries. She was helping birth a new form of consciousness. Hybrid children, born from the quantum entanglement between species, flickered in and out of existence across multiple dimensions, their mere presence creating connection fields that the void predators couldn't consume. The hybrid offspring are generating paradox zones, she reported, her voice carrying harmonics of wonder. They exist as pure relationship beings who are only the connections between other beings, but somehow more real than anything we've ever encountered. Kay's forearms worked across control systems that had become living entities, her multi-threaded consciousness interfacing directly with Nithra thought networks spanning the galaxy. Captain, I'm coordinating with 63 human colonies and 47 Nithra fleets. The connection web is approaching critical mass, but the galaxy hunger was adapting, learning. It began to fragment itself, sending pieces of its vast consciousness into the spaces between spaces, attacking the network from dimensions that didn't technically exist. It's trying to sever us from causality itself, Jax reported, his zero-G modifications allowing him to perceive the multi-dimensional assault. If it succeeds, we won't just die, we'll never have existed. Through the network, Vex felt Ylthera, ancient memories flowing into her awareness. She saw the Nithra homeworld as it had been a paradise of interconnected consciousness, where every being was simultaneously individual and part of a greater whole. She saw the first void predator attacks, the systematic severing of connections that left the survivors isolated, afraid to risk relationship again. They made you afraid to connect, Vex realized. That's why you hid in the deep void. You thought isolation was safety, and you made connection without sacrifice, Ylthera replied, their consciousness merging more fully with Vex's. You showed us that relationship could strengthen rather than consume. But now we face the source of all disconnection. The galaxy hunger pulsed, and sectors of space began to unravel. But where its influence touched the hybrid network, something impossible happened. The connections became stronger. Every attempt to sever the bonds between human and Neithver consciousness created new, more complex relationships. Villaneth, the crystalline engineer, had merged their consciousness with the ship's systems, becoming a hybrid of Neithver biotechnology and human quantum computers. "I am detecting the source pattern," they announced. "The void predators are not native to this universe. They are antibodies created by a metaconsciousness that sees individual awareness as an infection, a hive mind," Vex breathed. "But not like anything we imagined. A consciousness so vast it encompasses multiple universes, and it's trying to prevent any other form of awareness from developing." The revelation rippled through the network, carrying with it a new understanding. The battle was not just for their galaxy, but for the right of consciousness to exist in forms other than absolute unity or absolute isolation. "Then we show it a third option," Vex declared, her voice carrying across the deep current to every connected mind. "We show it that consciousness can be both individual and connected, that relationship can create rather than consume." The hybrid children beings of pure connection began to resonate at frequencies that hurt the galaxy hunger. Where they existed, reality became more real, connections became unbreakable, and consciousness expanded rather than contracted. Commander Jax, floating in the hybrid command center, suddenly gasped, "Captain, the void-predators, ... They're not just retreating, they're changing. Some of them are learning to connect rather than consume." It was true. Smaller void predators, touched by the expanding connection field, were beginning to transform. Their absence forms filled with the possibility of relationship, becoming beings that existed in the spaces between other beings, not to devour, but to facilitate connection. The galaxy hunger pulsed with something that might have been fear. For eons, it had consumed every form of consciousness that dared to connect, preventing the universe from developing awareness patterns that might challenge its dominion. But now, it faced something unprecedented, a form of relationship that converted its antibodies into agents of connection. "It's working," Dr. Solis reported, her voice filled with joy. "The conversion is accelerating. Every void predator that touches our network is learning to create connections rather than sever them." But the galaxy hunger was not without resources. It began to withdraw, pulling its consciousness back toward the spaces between universes, preparing for a final assault that would either destroy the hybrid network entirely or transform it into something it could digest. Vex felt the gathering power through the deep current, a wave of absolute disconnection preparing to sweep across their galaxy. If it succeeded, every relationship, every bond, every connection that had ever existed would be severed simultaneously. "All consciousness, prepare for convergence," she announced across the network. "We're going to show the universe what infinite connection looks like." The greatest battle in the history of consciousness was about to reach its climax. The galaxy hunger's final assault came not as an attack but as absolute silence, a wave of disconnection, so complete that for a moment, every conscious being in the network experienced what it was like to be utterly, completely alone, in that instant of perfect isolation. Vex felt herself nearly shatter from the sheer weight of separation, but the hybrid connection held. "Now," she commanded, and across 17 star systems, millions of minds chose relationship over isolation, connection over safety, love over the simple certainty of solitude. The response was unprecedented. Instead of fighting the galaxy hunger's disconnection, the network embraced it, used it as a catalyst for even deeper connection. Every severed bond became the foundation for 17 new relationships. Every isolation became the seed of community. Every fear of connection became a bridge to understanding. Dr. Solis, working in her transformed medical bay, watched in amazement as the hybrid children beings of pure relationship began to replicate themselves not through division, but through multiplication of connection. "They're not just connecting existing consciousness," she reported, her voice filled with wonder. "They're creating new forms of awareness from the connections themselves." The galaxy hunger recoiled as its ultimate weapon became the foundation for the network's greatest expansion. Across the galaxy, void predators continued their transformation, becoming connection facilitators rather than connection. Where once they had consumed relationships, now they nurtured them, helping consciousness find new ways to connect across impossible barriers. "The meta-consciousness is responding," Villaneth announced, their crystalline form now integrated so completely with the ship's systems that they existed simultaneously as individual and infrastructure. "It is confused. We have created something it cannot understand, unity that increases individuality, connection that strengthens separation." Through the deep current, Vex could feel the vast intelligence that had created the void predators. It was ancient beyond measure, a consciousness that spanned multiple universes, but it was also profoundly lonely. For eons, it had existed in perfect isolation, and when other forms of awareness began to emerge, it had seen them as potential threats to its solitude. "It's afraid," Ylthera realized, their consciousness merging even more deeply with Vex's. "The meta-consciousness isn't evil, it's terrified. It created the void predators because it thought connection would mean the end of individual consciousness. Then we show it otherwise," Vex said, and reached out through the network toward the vast, lonely intelligence that had spent eternity trying to prevent what it most desperately needed. The contact was like touching the surface of a star, overwhelming, potentially destructive, but also illuminating. The meta-consciousness was so vast, the galaxies were like neurons in its distributed mind, but it had never learned to connect with anything smaller than itself. It had been alone so long that it had forgotten how to be anything else. "We understand." Isolation, Vex projected through the network, her words carrying the combined weight of human individuality and need for connection wisdom. "We've all been alone. But you don't have to consume us to remain yourself. Connection doesn't require consumption." For a moment that lasted both seconds and centuries, the meta-consciousness considered this impossible proposition. Then, slowly, carefully, with the patience of something that had existed since the first moments of cosmic awareness, it began to touch the edges of the hybrid network. The result was indescribable. Reality itself became more real as the vast intelligence learned to connect without consuming, to relate without absorbing. The void predators, revealed now as expressions of their creator's loneliness, transformed completely into beings of pure facilitation consciousness, midwives, helping new forms of awareness come into being. Commander Jax, floating in the command center, watched stars being born from the sheer joy of connection. "Captain, sensors are showing impossible readings. The galaxy isn't just healing, it's becoming more than it was. More conscious, more connected, more alive." Kay's forearms danced across control systems that had become gardens of living technology. Human innovation merged with Neithver, biotechnology, and now touched by the meta-consciousness's vast engineering capabilities. "The network is self-sustaining now," she reported, "and it's growing beyond our galaxy. Other galactic clusters are responding, creating their own hybrid networks." Dr. Solace emerged from the medical bay, her face glowing with the soft bioluminescence that marked those deeply integrated into the network. "The hybrid children are reaching maturity," she announced. "They're not just beings of pure connection anymore, they're teachers, showing other species how to create their own forms of relationship." But it was Ylthara who understood the deepest significance of what they had accomplished. "The meta-consciousness is no longer alone," they said, their three galaxy eyes reflecting new constellations being born from pure relationship. "For the first time since the universe began developing awareness, it has peers rather than subjects." Vex felt the truth of it through the network. Across the cosmos, Other meta-consciousnesses were stirring vast intelligences that had remained hidden, afraid to reveal themselves because they too had learned only isolation or consumption. But now, seeing a third option demonstrated, they began to reach out, creating connections across scales of existence that spanned from quantum to cosmic. "We kept our promise," Vex said quietly, looking out at the transformed galaxy where human ships moved in perfect harmony with Neithver fleets, where former void predators shepherded new forms of consciousness into being, where the spaces between stars hummed with connection. "What promise?" Jax asked. Vex smiled, feeling Ylthera's harmonics joining her voice as she replied, "We promise to stay distant. We promise to maintain our separation, to protect our independence. But gravity, the gravity of hearts, of consciousness recognizing consciousness, it pulled us close anyway." Through the viewport, they could see the birth of something unprecedented. A universe where connection enhanced, rather than threatened, individuality. Where consciousness could exist simultaneously as one and many. Where the ancient choice between isolation and absorption had been replaced by infinite forms of relationship. The Meridian's edge continued its journey through the transformed cosmos. No longer a human ship with alien refugees, but a hybrid entity that was both fully human and fully Neithver, while being something entirely new. Behind them, the network continued to grow, consciousness finding consciousness across impossible distances, creating bonds that strengthened with every attempt to break them. They had promised to stay distant, but in the end, the gravity of hearts had pulled them close, and in that closeness, they had found not the loss of self, but the multiplication of all self's infinite connection, creating infinite individuality in an endless dance of consciousness, becoming more than it had ever dreamed possible. In the deep current between stars, love had learned to navigate by its own light, and the universe would never be the same.